Okay, yeah, so at this point, it feels fair to say that the
Kontrol
Mark III, the S61 I have here, but really all of them, are a fairly controversial product. Now, the first video I made before I knew everything about it, and that's pretty much on me. I missed a presentation I could have watched that I just didn't, and therefore I missed a really important piece of information, which is that the
Kontrol
Mark III does not support machine at all. And that's a huge deal for a lot of people, understandably. So yeah, that's on me for not talking about that. I just straight up didn't know, but it wasn't like someone said, don't say anything. I just straight up missed that presentation. I also referenced a loop hop video that I didn't watch all the way through, which at the end of that video also explains that. I watched like the first 10 minutes, and the first 10 minutes mentioned the buttons were gone, which I noticed myself. But I was very naive, and I was like, well, sure, they removed the buttons, but there's probably some way it still connects, but it doesn't. So that's a pretty big miss for a lot of people, and I get that. And so yeah, there were obviously a lot of lessons for me from making that video, and I'm definitely going to be more aware and do more due diligence to make sure I understand every piece of information I can about a new product before I talk about it. I'm gonna miss things sometimes because I'm human, but that was a pretty big miss. So I do feel bad about that. And honestly, I just want to genuinely say thank you to everyone who held me accountable in the comments of that video. There were some people who assumed some pretty bad intention, but we're all strangers on the internet, so I get that. I think one of the #1 comments was sellout review, and that hurt just because like, I hate to think of myself as that. I literally have a tattoo that says stay honest. It's my only tattoo. I try to keep it real, but I messed up, and that's 100% fair. Now, the machine controversy actually isn't the only controversy about this keyboard. I think about 2 weeks ago, maybe more, maybe less, from when I'm filming this, Native Instruments actually announced that they're deprecating the complete Mark I keyboards. Deprecation isn't exactly the right word. They're calling it end of life, and that basically just means that no future software updates are going to support the Mark I, and if you want to keep using the Mark I, you have to use Complete Control 2.9, and you can't have 2.9 installed at the same time as 3.0, which creates some complications for people who have both Mark Is, Mark IIs, and potentially Mark IIIs in their studio. So this one's a bit tricky because I am someone who uses newer gear in general. Even before I was getting stuff for free, I do tend to upgrade more than your average user, so I'm not usually affected by things like this. I think there are definitely arguments in both directions on this. From Native Instruments' perspective, at least in their forum posts and the replies that their product people were giving, they really only have so many resources they can dedicate to one thing or another, and 10 years of software support is a pretty long time from a technology perspective, although you can make an argument it's not a super long time from an instrument perspective, which is where I think people are coming from who are upset. In addition to that, they made a point to wait until VST3 was out and Apple Silicon support was enabled. And so I think there's this perspective on their end that they've basically covered the bases for quite a long generation of that software still working. They're just not going to be supporting it in the future. And so this is one of those ones where I actually do have a lot of empathy and sympathy for both parties, because I think anyone who bought a Mark I, especially like the S88, which was a really expensive and large keyboard that I think came out more recently than some of the original Mark I keyboards. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Those folks, I understand being like, whoa, I paid a lot of money for this. And especially people who want to use newer products with older products at the same time on the same computer, or maybe not even at the same time, but on the same computer. I get the frustration about not being able to have Complete Control 2.9 and 3.0 installed at the same time. That to me is like the biggest, I hope they can fix that thing. I totally understand not creating new updates for something 10 years old. Like that kind of makes sense. And honestly, having a direct download link to be able to download the supported software, like the one that still hypothetically works, I think that's really cool. However, I do think that it is frustrating for people who have invested a lot into the ecosystem to have the 1-2 punch of the new keyboard's not working with machine, even if they say it was a really small amount of people who used that integration. I was one of those people. I used to plug my Complete Control Mark II directly into my Machine Plus, and I made a lot of beats that way. And then also, you know, the people using the Mark Is are also a pretty small group of people, at least who are still buying software and using it. I get that too. And there's really only so much that one company can do when it comes to supporting new hardware, even the previous generation hardware, which is not being deprecated yet. And I have no timeline on that, but given how long they supported Mark I and what the technological differences were between 1 and 2, you could imagine at some point they may deprecate Mark II, but I have no insider info on that. I can only really say that I do have a lot of respect for the company. but I also really feel for the community that feels like a few different recent choices have been made that were pretty negative for them. And I say all of this for the probably controversial reason that I really like the Kontrol MK3. Most of what I said in my first video is true. One of the big things that's not true is that there are cons. I thought there weren't cons, and so like I've said at the beginning of this video, there are cons. For real. And beyond the cons that we've already talked about, the machine integration and some of the stuff about deprecation of Mark I, on the specific product, there are also cons such as it still feels a little rough. It still feels like they're kind of working out the kinks and it's not quite a full gold standard release yet. I still see bugs even though I've configured it kind of the way I think it's supposed to be configured. Now those bugs are nowhere near as egregious as the ones in the Machine Plus at launch, or some of the bugs that people have seen on Akai products, or many of the things that I had seen on my initial version of the Ableton Push 3, but a bug is a bug is a bug. And if you paid for a product, it's fair to expect it to work, so be aware of that. The primary issue I've seen, and it's a pretty low stakes issue, it would be disingenuous not to mention it, is if I drag a new complete control over and the keyboard goes over to that track, it just says default MIDI template right here. Now on a Mark II, it would have populated the browser, and if I hit browser, it does. It lets me browse for the specific track, but it doesn't default to that, and so it can give you the impression that it's not working. It's a little thing and it's a thing I think they'll patch, but I noted it and I don't want to omit that because I am trying to keep it honest. Okay, so that's a lot of bad news or frustrating news to get out of the way. It's all real, it's all true, and I really did want to get it out there because I will probably be called a shill for how much I like this thing. So I just want to be clear, I'm aware of the issues, those issues are genuine, and there's a lot of good things about this keyboard, and it's probably my favorite keyboard I've ever used, so life is full of multitudes.
Okay, yeah, so at this point, I filmed a shot of me talking and walking through this beat that I made and like the different plugins that I used. All of them were Native Instruments, most of them, or all of them were NKS. I guess there were actually a few Arturia, but they were also NKS. Most of them were not NKS 2.0, which is like the new platform that this keyboard supports, but they all were very fun to use and fun to automate. But yeah, the mic placement on my shirt made most of that audio unusable, so we're going to cut straight ahead to the point where I just play the beat for you and you can kind of hear what I made. Sorry about that.
Okay, now I've got those levels up. Let's see what happens if I play through the beat. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that beat. You can kind of see what I see in it, which is just that, one, the quality and the sound of the NKS plugins that Native Instruments makes are really good. I feel like when I use this setup, I get the best of the DAW, which is just that the sound quality and the flexibility is way higher, but I get the physical tactile interface that is pre-mapped and scripted for my most used plugins, which is Native Instruments and Arturia, so that I basically feel like I'm using a piece of hardware, but I'm controlling software. Like I said, it has issues. The machine integration loss is a pretty big deal, and I hope they find at least a workaround to allow some level of interconnectivity. It's fine that it doesn't have the same buttons. In fact, I used to get comments that were like, what's even the point of having the buttons on both? That's fair. But I would still want it to show the information of the plugins on both screens or let you do something versus nothing. When it comes to the Mark I deprecation, I think that's a bummer. From a technology perspective, 10 years of support and a hosted, continued to be accessible version that you can use for here on out is pretty good. But that lack of intercompatibility, at least as of right now, I believe that's still true. Please correct me in the comments if that's changed. But I believe you still can't have 3.0 and 2.9 on the same machine. That's a bummer for sure, and I hope they find some way to make that work if that's still a problem. Frankly, I'm pretty excited about the future of the device. Like I said, you should never buy anything based on what you think it'll do tomorrow. But they've been pretty clear that this is an expandable platform. And given that they supported the first generation for 10 years, I'm curious to see what they'll do with this one as far as what they'll add over time. Yeah, I think people's complaints are valid. I think it is a very expensive MIDI controller, and that's real, but it's not the only very expensive controller. Not that that makes it okay or not okay. It's a fact. There are plenty of cheap controllers that don't have polyphonic aftertouch, that don't have this kind of integration with plugins. There are a lot of options for MIDI controllers, so in that sense, I think it's cool that they're in this space kind of making something top-end, high-level. I believe they still sell options that aren't that high-end, and you can still buy the Mark II, I think. This device does make me curious about what future Arturia and Novation keyboards will be like as well. I've liked those brands in the past, and I'm hopeful that things like MIDI 2.0 and polyphonic aftertouch are going to come to more keyboards across the board, because that would be awesome. Because there's a lot of potential there. I know Korg just released a 2.0 keyboard that looked kind of interesting. That again, Loopop did a video on that I again didn't watch all the way through, but watch his video on that for more information. And I know I say it in like every video, but I mean it. Thank you so much to everyone who's liked and subscribed my videos. We passed 10,000 subscribers recently, and I really can't believe it. The fact that anyone is interested in what I have to say blows my mind all the time. So thank you so much for watching. And if there's anything you have any questions about with this keyboard, feel free to ask in the comments. I may not know everything. You may want to ask Native Instruments or other people, but I'm happy to answer what I can. Again, I'm not a representative of that company. They just sent me this keyboard. There were no strings attached. It wasn't like make a video. It was just like, here's this keyboard, just to be transparent. But like I said, because I got it for free, that's going to change how I experience it compared to someone who, let's say, earns the minimum wage in Portland, making $15 an hour, and saves up for a really long time to buy that keyboard. That's going to be a really different experience for them, and they might have different feelings and opinions on it. And where you land on that scale is going to be dependent on your income and all kinds of other variables I can't speak to. But just know, because I got it for free, I may have a different opinion than you would if you bought it outright. But I tried to show you what's good and what's not good. And again, this isn't really a review. It's more just more in-depth impressions, but hopefully it was useful. And if not, I'll do better next time. I don't know. Anyway, have a good weekend, and see you soon.